In this part of the Secrets video series, I will show you my workflow when it comes to creating landing pages in Figma. I'll explain why I do certain things, share some tips and tricks, and I'll sprinkle some design secrets throughout the video, so make sure to stay till the end. Now, let's go. What we see here is the base we created in the last video. You can check that link up here. I take the Frankenstein wireframe, I add that next to my frame, and then I start creating the first section. The first section being the nav bar. I add a placeholder logo type, just like this. I take then a heading, like one of the smallest headings, heading 6. I create some links. I look at my reference designs, and in this case, we have these rounded buttons, and I want to mimic that. So I take these buttons, I create my own versions of these buttons. I start playing around with the distances, with the shapes. I change the copy, and I add them into auto layouts and give these auto layouts the same widths so that everything will be centered. And especially these links here will be centered because the buttons have originally a wider width than the logo type. So if we don't do that, then the links are going to be placed a little bit to the left. So I give them the same width like this. So you can see even the logo type, I give a fixed width like that, and then I can put space between. And by the way, if you want to learn more about all layouts, video up here. Then it's time for the hero. And now I grab the reference material, I drag that in, I lock it, and I give it an opacity, and then I start adding my copy on top of it. And I try to mimic what we see here in the reference material as closely as I can. So that goes for text style, it goes for the amount of copy. So I'm not quite happy with it, so I start changing the width or the font weight and just mix and match till I get where I want to. I do the same for the body text, as you can see here, changing the line height, changing the font weight once again. And here you can see me taking the buttons from the nav bar, duplicating those and dragging them onto the hero. And this is because I want to stay consistent with my buttons. But these are going to be smaller because the nav bar is smaller and the ones in the hero is going to be larger. So I make those into button medium by just naming them button medium. And I'll do the same for these, but I'll call them button large, and I'll change the size of the text within the buttons. And then I start playing around with just the paddings a bit. Then I launch a plugin called Vector Logos to start adding logo types into the design, just like the reference design here. You'll see. And if you want to hear about my favorite plugins, then you can check out my video on the 8 most underrated plugins in 2022. So I add the Spotify logo and I add all the logos here. Then I start playing with the sizes for the logos because, yeah, they're going to be different sizes because they're different logos. So I want them to stay consistent. I add a consistent color to them. Then I start adding the nav bar into my hero. I start changing the positioning of everything. So here you can see that I'm using the 8-point grid as a reference. So 64 here. Everything based on the 8-point grid. Now I go to my illustrations. I add an illustration to the layout, and I want to position it so it adheres to the 12-column layout. You can see here. Change the colors so that they match. I want it to stay just gray at this moment. Don't want to add colors just yet. Change the copy in the buttons like this. Change the copy in the heading also. And you can see I have problems when I'm typing. Then apparently this is now a payment solution, and I changed the name to MoneyPile, which is super original. Then it's time to add some icons, and when you add icons from something like OpenIcon, for example, make sure that the icons have strokes, because then it's much easier for you to stay consistent with icons across the board. So that's why I removed this icon, because they didn't use strokes. So I go to my old favorite of feather icons and I use an icon there instead. Change the sizing and the paddings a bit so that it looks good. I even realized that maybe I don't want that button in the nav bar. Maybe I just want 2 buttons in the hero and just 1 single call to action in the nav. So I removed it. Now it's time to take the palette and start playing with some colors. And you can see me here adding a black to this button and then giving it an opacity. So this is not how you do the final version. In the final version, you want to use real colors, like actual hex codes with 100% opacity. But for this, I want to be able to change colors of the background quickly without having to change a bunch of colors. So then I use the same color with an opacity instead. So you can see how that's done. And then I change these grays to blacks instead as well. And now it's time to duplicate and try different color schemes. So I use my palette, I go to the frames, and I just change the colors. Hey guys, I just want to chime in with the 7th secret, and that is minimalism. Look at our designs. Minimal illustrations, rarely using any colors, using 1 font and a very limited set of font sizes. We're using fewer things to be more effective in our designs. Simple as that. And then I even do the inverted version, you're gonna see here, where I take everything except the background, make it white, and then I go to just the background fill, and change that to black. So I do that for the hero and the nav. Just like this. Then I go and tweak the illustration a bit. I even tweak the button up there. Then I pick one that I like the most. I do some tweaks. I made the buttons, or the button, the call to action, the main primary color, green here for the button. Tweak it, and then we add in the cards. So reusing the frames is nice because then you don't have to do all the work of getting the alignment or the paddings or the margins between different texts and things like that. So I have my cards. I start playing around with the shades of these cards. What will they look like? The corner radius, not quite happy with it. Then I play around with the typography a bit, making it look clean and nice. Changing the colors of the cards since I changed the background to white here. Now I grab a different heading, a smaller heading, and use that for the card because we have this bigger heading as kind of the main heading of the section. And for the cards, since they are smaller, I want them to have smaller text as well. So I grab what we had in the text hierarchy, but I change it up a bit. So you can see here, I tweak it, I make it bold instead because we've used bold for everything instead of semi-bold, which was in the text hierarchy. And this is, once again, like I've said, change things as you go. The process of being a designer is super iterative and it's not straightforward. It's going to be back and forth all the time. Change the copy. It's going to be 2 words, as we can see in the reference design. Do the same for the body text. I'm going to add these into an auto layout instead of those being just within a frame that is called card. I want them to be an auto layout in themselves because that makes it much easier to handle them. So they're an auto layout. I add a placeholder for the image so I can add some spacing very easily. I can add the paddings like this. Boom. And then it's time to plug in the illustrations. So I add the illustrations to the document, but I want just parts of the illustration. So I go into the illustration, I duplicate the illustration, I grab the part I want, and for this one you're going to see that I even use a mask to get certain parts because this illustration is not made up out of strokes, and this full illustration is one illustration. So if I remove the bottom right part or the bottom left part, actually just the parts that are connected. So the bottom right part is okay in this instance. I could remove everything else and it stays intact. But if I start removing the bottom left part here, everything is gonna be white. So I need to use a mask in this case. I could go into detail and just remove shapes or remove paths, but I wanna make it simple, so I go and use a mask instead. And by the way, if you wanna learn how to mask, check out this video. So first of all, we use this. I didn't need to mask in this one. I'll add it to a frame so that I have better control of its positioning. this. I change it from scale to center so that it doesn't scale inside of the frame. And then I duplicate the cards and I do what I just said. I mask like this. Use the mask to get the parts of the illustrations that I want. Then I add that to the card. Reposition stuff so that it looks a bit better, adhering to the 8-point grid again. Changing the color of the card, changing the copy of the heading. Then changing the copy of those cards as well. And onto the new section. Here we have this section where I'm taking that wavy text and I'm going to make it an arc instead, because I don't want to rip it straight off. So I make an arc, and how I do this, I take the pen tool, I do an arc, and then I use a plugin called ToPath. I link these two, the text and the arc, and we get an arced text. So check this out. Boom. That's awesome. All right, so that's done. Then I grab the card because it has an auto layout. I don't want to remake that same auto layout because it's the same. You can see 4, 4, 4. This has the same kind of layout, 4, 4, 4. So I grab that same card so that I don't have to remake it. But I just remove some items within it, of course. Then I create a play button. I use an icon library once again. And instead of having an ellipse in the background, I just make it into a frame that I give a rounded border radius or corner radius instead. Play around with the sizing a bit so that it matches the reference like that. Then I go into Unsplash, the Unsplash plugin, start adding some photos. And here I start adding a linear gradient, which is a mistake. We're going to go into it later, but that's what I do. I add a linear gradient and I start playing around with the size of the play button here, or the play icon. And once I feel satisfied, I even added a stroke to it to make it match the overall theme a bit better. And now I realign them. I've added some different images to everything. And I feel that, okay, we have something here, at least. Now it's time to add the text. So once again, I reuse what we've already done. So we have the text from the cards above. This text is not going to be as big, so I'm going to change the size of it, but it's in an auto layout already, so it saves me some time. Change the color, change the orientation, change the size of the heading, even of the body text. And I'm going to change the words within it, change the copy, change the width, and I'll make that into a card, an auto layout card, and then I duplicate that instead of, you know, doing the same thing for every single card there. I've already created the layout, so to save time, I just duplicate that one and then copy the images into the new cards instead. Reposition some stuff. Design OCD. I remove the linear gradients, finally, and I remove the stroke as well. I add a button, once again, taking what we already have from the hero section. I use the same button large, drag it down here and change the colors. Reposition stuff, once again, adhering to the 8-point grid system. So 72. That feels kind of done, so I jump onto the next one. Now I'm interrupting again with the 8th secret. And this is about inconsistency. We really want to be consistent in our designs. We want to use patterns. Humans like patterns. But sometimes you want to break patterns. So with an example here that is perfect, this wavy text. First of all, we break the pattern of having it just going horizontally like this, pretty boring. But we also break the layout we have. Right? We have this 12-column layout and everything is placed within this container. But with this, we go outside of it and we break it. So breaking patterns can be really, really effective for creating interest in your designs. The payment solution you've been waiting for. So I copied the hero section and then I start taking things from the second section, so illustrations, and even illustrations from the hero. I put those into the design like this. I take away the color and realize, wait a second, okay, I didn't remove the color from here. So let's do that as well. Like that, changing the color for that as well, and grabbing a new illustration from the library, putting in the top. Now it looks like a series of illustrations. It looks coherent. If I didn't add that one to the top, it would feel like something's missing in the top right. Then I start changing the copy once again. I make it all into an auto layout, and what I do here is I position the text as one unit, and then I put the button a bit further down. This is something I like to do because it makes, yeah, once again, the text feels like one unit and the button is still part of this unit, but it's a bit further down. It feels like the design is more thought out. It feels like we've actually not just put everything into a single auto layout and it has the same margin all across the board. It feels a bit more designed. So I do that. I even add a subheading here, and then I'll change the paddings or the margins a bit, the distances between those. Go back to the hero to do the same. So I add the paddings or the margins, and then I even change the widths here so that it really adheres to these columns, because otherwise, why do we use the column layout? So I start making sure that it's adhering to that. Now it's the last section. This is the footer, and I take the nav bar here. I add that just because I want the logo, basically. So that's the one thing I want to grab from our nav. I place the things in here so that it adheres to the reference material, the links, as we can see here. Try to mimic it, and then I realized, why not just grab, once again, the reference, grab it, take it into the frame, put it in the background, lock it, and then give it an opacity so that we have that as a real reference in the background while we're designing. So I do that, like that, give it an opacity, and then I start adding things on top of it. So I take the heading 3, change the orientation, put it into an auto layout, then I grab, once again, from what we've already done, I go to the top of the page because there we have something that kind of resembles the size, a text that kind of resembles the size of this category heading in this section. So grab that, take it in here, and start adding it all into an auto layout like this. Give it a name, category plus links, then add some icons from Feather Icons once again, auto layout. Everything auto layouts, guys. That's the most efficient way to work. You should really start utilizing auto layouts as much as you can in your designs. Duplicating, saving ourselves some time. That's the main thing. Start thinking about how will this be aligned, adding some boldness to these category headings, adding some opacity. Making this auto layout, because now everything, text, is encapsulated within an auto layout. And I want it to always have these distances. So instead of having a frame encapsulated, I just make it into an auto layout and I give it the paddings needed in the top and in the bottom. And then I add a fixed width to it. You're going to see here. And I then set the orientation to be centered, but it should be top centered. You can see that the middle category was in the center, like in the real center. It should be aligned to the top. Like this. And there we have the footer, and I start looking at everything. Is it looking as I want it to? I add it all into an auto layout, call it desktop. Once again, looking through the design. Is it looking tight enough? Is it looking good enough? And then I come to the conclusion that not everything is looking tight enough. I start changing stuff, adding some color to this big text. Once again, the design process is messy, guys. It's going to be all over the place, so don't worry about that. But try to find your own consistency in how you do these things. Adding some colors to the illustrations, because this section in particular was pretty boring. Nothing was happening, so I add some colors. I add this little just piece of illustration from the same library here to the top right because that corner felt a bit like empty. So I wanted something to happen there as well. So have this unified, coherent design. Send it to the back, so it just pops out under the card. I add something here to the bottom as well because this section also felt a bit empty and I wanted to kind of merge these illustrations together to feel more coherent. So I added this background ellipse, like that. Then I go through my designs again. Maybe something we want to change here. These images don't fit into the rest of the design. Everything is illustrations and flat. So I want to change that as well. So change the background color, then I add illustrations into this, and I change the color of the play buttons to the primary call to action button, or primary call to action color rather. Make these black and white, fully black and white. Yeah, I'm just tweaking things all the time, zooming in and out to see what it looks like. Now I feel that I got something that is good enough. So I grab that whole frame, I take it, and I duplicate it again because it's time to play around with colors once again. I want to see if we can find something else that looks better. So changing the colors of everything. You can see here we made like a beige version, yellowish. Try something that is fully blue instead. Maybe that's the route we want to go. Change the card designs that it maps. And by the way, the same thing I did for buttons here, where I took a dark color, added an opacity. I can do the same things for these cards actually, but I didn't do that here. So I could add one color to the cards and just use an opacity. So when I change the background colors, it would be much easier because then I just change one color instead. Try a white version, and here I try greenish for these cards. Once again, playing around, seeing what looks the best, what feels the best. You can see here, I'm gonna do a green version, a bold version, something I talked about in the first video, that I wanted to try something like that. Then I need to re-add some colors, because when you use the selection colors, sometimes that happens. Change the green to the blue to see how that looks as well. Then I realized that this black isn't really going to be AA+ in terms of accessibility when it comes to colors. So I changed the dark text to white instead. And then I changed the color of the call to actions to black, actually, so that it pops out more. Like this, you can see, changing that so that we have that strong color really popping out, so it has a contrast against the white. But in the end, I think that the green one looks the best, and maybe even the footer should be dark. And that's the design. In the next video, we'll make this site responsive and talk about the secret for making responsive UI design. Now, if you like this kind of content, liking, subscribing, and commenting always helps, guys. Until the next one, have a great life, and we'll talk soon. Ciao.